welcome to our very first ever Racial Reconciliation Forum, a pathway to a more inclusive Contra Costa County legal community. My name is Kiana Washington. I'm a criminal defense attorney and a civil rights attorney and managing partner at Washington Associates in Walnut Creek. I grew up in El Cerrito and currently reside in Richmond. I'm also a member of the Contra Costa County Bar Association Board of Directors and a member of the Diversity Committee of CCCBA. I will be moderating our discussion tonight. This forum is born out of a discussion we had last year at the Diversity Committee meeting, where some members shared their stories and experiences that they had with diversity in the Contra Costa County legal community. Some of their stories were very heart-wrenching, and it became clear to me that we should have a larger discussion, and our distinguished guests here have generously agreed to participate in our panel discussion tonight. In terms of structure, the forum is divided into two parts. The first will deal with the experiences of these panelists and what their experiences with diversity in our legal community here in Contra Costa. I will ask them questions, and then we will have questions from the audience. The questions from the audience, you might have noticed that you have some index cards on your seats. What we'd ask you to do is write your questions on the index cards and then pass them to Tanya, Tanya Brown, who's sitting over here. If you need pens, we have pens over here. And so you pass those to her, she will sort through them. We apologize that not all questions can be asked due to time constraints and a desire to make sure we have a constructive and respectful conversation. Please keep that in mind when formulating your questions. So now I'll introduce our distinguished panelists. Right here on the far end, we have Phil Anderson. Phil is the managing attorney at the State Farm Insurance Bay Area Law Office called Philip M. Anderson and Associates. He served as president of the Contra Costa County Bar Association in 2017 and has made diversity and inclusion his mission through his leadership at the Bar Association and also at State Farm. Phil spearheaded the CCCBA Diversity Checklist Award, and State Farm awarded him for his commitment to diversity by giving him a monetary award, which he turned around and donated to the first inaugural minority networking event that we held last fall. Phil grew up in Hawaii, and he grew to appreciate diversity through his rich experiences with various cultures during his childhood. Next, to Phil's left, we have Robin Pearson. Robin is a founding partner at Pearson & Schachter in Walnut Creek. Pearson & Schachter is proudly a certified minority-owned business. Robin practices business and corporate law as an experienced and accomplished trial attorney. Robin served as the first person of color to ever hold the position of president of the Contra Costa County Bar Association. She started the Diversity Committee during her tenure. Robin has used her experiences as one of few black women in corporate and business law to raise awareness of diversity in the Contra Costa County legal community. Seated to Robin's left, we have another Robin, Robin Lepetsky. Robin is the public defender of Contra Costa County. The public defender's office currently has offices in Martinez, in Richmond, and a satellite office in Pittsburgh. Prior to becoming the head public defender, Robin worked as deputy public defender starting in 1990. In 2010, Robin became the first ever female head public defender of Contra Costa. Robin, through her work at the public defender's office and numerous criminal justice organizations, works to achieve justice for members of diverse populations. She gained some public attention when her office did a Black Lives Matter demonstration on the steps of the Contra Costa County Superior Courthouse and spoke out about racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Seated to Robin's left, we have Diana Becton. Diana Becton is the District Attorney of Contra Costa County. In 2017, when the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors appointed her, she became the first ever woman and first black person to hold the office of district attorney in Contra Costa. The district attorney's office has locations in Martinez and Richmond and a satellite office in Pittsburgh as well. Prior to becoming the district attorney, Diana was municipal court and then superior court judge. She was one of the first and few black women to ever hold that position in Contra Costa County. She proudly graduated from Castlemont High School in East Oakland, a public school. She campaigned in 2018 on a platform of restorative justice and destroying the school-to-prison pipeline. Seated to Diana's left, we have Judge Benjamin Reyes II, a Superior Court judge in Contra Costa County, currently assigned to criminal cases at the Richmond Courthouse. He was the first Filipino-American person appointed to the Contra Costa County bench in May of 2017 after a long and fulfilling career both in private and public sectors. Prior to joining a civil law firm, Judge Reyes worked for the city attorney in San Jose. Just prior to being appointed to the bench, Judge Reyes was an equity partner with Myers Nabe, where he continued in government service, advising small municipalities in the East and the East Bay Regional Park Service. Judge Reyes was instrumentally involved in Myers Nabe's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program and Diversity Fellowship. Upon becoming a judicial officer in Contra Costa County, Judge Reyes became actively involved in the CCCBA Diversity Committee. He is also a member of a number of minority bar associations, including the Filipino Bar Association of Northern California, Asian American Association of the Greater Bay Area. And seated to Judge Reyes' left, we have Judge Anita Santos. She is a Superior Court judge in Contra Costa County. She grew up in Japan and is multilingual. She attended UC Berkeley for undergrad and received her bachelor's degrees in sociology and ethnic studies. Prior to being appointed to the bench in 2014, Judge Santos was a Concord police officer, a deputy district attorney, and then a family law practitioner. After many years assigned to the family law court in Pittsburgh, Judge Santos was recently assigned to criminal trials in Martinez. Judge Santos has been an active member of a number of minority bar associations, including the Charles Houston Bar Association and the California Association of Black Lawyers. So the first question I will pose is, I'd like you all to give us a brief introduction of your experiences with diversity in Contra Costa County and explain why you think diversity is so important in the Contra Costa legal community, starting with Bill.
Thank you for being here. I'm honored to be here. Can you hear me okay? It may not be on. Now it's on. I'll speak loudly. As mentioned, I grew up on the North Shore of Oahu, a little town called Laie. And all of my friends were from very diverse backgrounds. We got along great. I came from early childhood experiences where diversity worked for me. And so I've carried that with me throughout my life. And as I've had the opportunity to hire people in my law firms over the last 25 years, I've tried to take my time, find the right candidates that are diverse in nature, and we've had a wonderful experience in our office, and I tried to share that with the bar when I was the president, by the help of many others, including Robin and the rest who were on the committee, to develop this program, which helps us encourage diversity in the bar. And I'm going to keep my comments very short so you can all hear from everybody else.
Okay. I'm coming from a law firm perspective. I've worked in law firms my entire legal career, which has been 30 years now. And as you know, I own my own small firm. And I've worked to improve diversity in the legal profession the entire time. And I mean from a first-year associate based on experiences that I had in the various law firms that I was working at. I feel we have a responsibility to make things better for those who come behind us. We're very privileged to be here and do what we do. I fought very hard to get here throughout my legal career, and I'm really honored by being on this panel and being able to speak on the issues of diversity. But it's been very, very difficult, and I'm not going to mince words about that. There's been a lot of resistance and difficulty that we faced from the very beginning in this county. We have this wonderful diversity committee, and yes, I was part of the team that founded this committee, but I also have to recognize two people in the audience, Larry Cook and Lisa Roberts, who helped me very much in putting this together, along with the great Dick Frankel, who is not here today. It takes a village to put these things together, and that's what we've done. Very briefly, it's been my experience as a woman of color in law firms that it's been a real struggle to thrive. And working in law firms can be very isolating. A lot of times you feel excluded and made to feel invisible, and that equals a hostile work environment. The amount of stress that women of color experience working in an overwhelmingly white and male profession can be exhausting and at times depressing. In my practice area, business, real estate, commercial litigation, finding an African American woman is rare. And I've been told that they compare it to finding either a unicorn or Bigfoot. We face racism and we're held to a higher standard. This is true. We face sexism, harassment, demeaning comments, and are often paid less. And we're excluded from advancement opportunities also. A lot of times in the beginning of my career, I was steered to work with clients who they only wanted somebody who was a person of color, so they would trot me out from the back under piles of discovery, and then once the meeting was over, I would go right back to my office. There's too much hostility and not enough support for women of color in this practice in law firms particularly. We'll get into more of that later. Oh, we're passing this mic down.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to see this event. Can you hear me? Okay. So I come at this topic as a white woman, so I can't obviously speak to experiences of people of color, but I can certainly speak to the experiences of gender bias, particularly in the criminal defense field. When I started in the public defender's office close to 30 years ago now, there were not a whole lot of women, not a whole lot of people of color. We have improved a lot in the area of gender, I have to say, but not so much when it comes to the hiring and retention and promotion of people of color within our organizations, within our agencies in Contra Costa County. In terms of why is diversity important, I mean, it's almost sad that we have to answer that question, but diversity, to my mind, is particularly important when we're talking about criminal defense and indigent defense work, because the racial disparities in that arena are so profound that when you add to that a layer of the attorneys involved in that work also showing a racial disparity, then you just amplify the problems. And so the more that we can be diverse and inclusive in our makeup of the work that we do, the better we will be at addressing these issues that go deeper than just who are we that are working in these agencies, but who are we serving, who is the community, what are we really doing in this work, and without representation from a diverse array of backgrounds, we just can't get that work done. So it's critical that we have these conversations, and it's critical, particularly in the criminal defense arena, that we really focus on this issue. So I'm happy to be here.
So good evening, everyone. My pleasure to be here with you this evening and to have a chance to have this conversation about a topic that really is very important. So in terms of my experiences with diversity, I was just sitting here sort of reflecting. Probably have to really start maybe close to 30 years ago when I was serving on the board for the Bar Association. And I can remember driving through the tunnel to come into Contra Costa County for meetings. And once I would arrive, it's almost like felt like I went into another world, and coming from Alameda County at the time. And once I would arrive, there would be no persons of color in the room. And so it's really beautiful to look out here today and to see such a diverse audience and a diverse group of people here in Contra Costa County at this time. So that experience sort of carried over for me when I was appointed to become a judge in Contra Costa County. Even though I was not the first African American to serve on the bench, I was certainly the only for quite a number of years. And so that can be a very isolating experience, and I think it is really what drove much of my work to become very involved with making sure that we brought on others onto our bench in terms of diversity of gender, in terms of diversity, in terms of our ethnicity, etc. So the question for us is about our experiences, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, but during the time I served as a judge, I worked on the Judicial Mentoring Committee along with the Bar Association. We did develop the first mentoring program for those who wanted to become judicial officers. The mentoring program was open to everyone, but certainly we were recruiting people of color to become judges. Served on many panels for So You Want to Be a Judge, recruiting people to become a part of our bench. And then while serving as president for the National Association of Women Judges, we have several programs, the Bench to Bar. We also brought the Color of Justice program here to Contra Costa County in partnership with the Bar Association again, so that we can involve our youth, and especially youth of color, and expose them to legal careers in Contra Costa County. And when I chaired the COAF, which is the Council on Access and Fairness, we also put a great deal of emphasis. In fact, our entire work for me was just building and working on the diversity pipeline that led to becoming lawyers and judges. So that's just a little bit of my work, and I'm sure that as we go along, we'll talk a little bit more.
Thank you, Judge Beck.
Might be easier to use this microphone or this table.
Yeah.
Hi, can everyone hear me? So again, my name is Benjamin Reyes, and I'm proud to be the first Filipino-American judge in Contra Costa County. And what Kiana didn't say in the introduction of me is that I'm only the second Filipino-American trial judge in the last 30 years, and in the 9 Bay Area counties. I was born in another country. I was born in the Philippines at the Naval Air Station Subic Bay, and I come from an immigrant family. My family immigrated to the United States in the late 60s when I was 3 years old, and English was not my first language. I believe in diversity, and when I was first hired and practiced law, I had a natural affinity towards working for public agencies because I thought that public agencies were much more effective at recruiting people from diverse backgrounds than private institutions. And my value in stating my belief in diversity is that I believe that it's important that the institutions that serve all of us, both private and public, need to be reflective of the community, need to be reflective of the community's values. And as I've practiced law for 24 years, and in my first 2 years of being a judge here, I've come to realize that the values that we all have, no matter what our backgrounds are very common, and there is much more that unifies us than what divides us. So I hope to maybe talk more about that particular message and that concept as we get through this evening.
I always have to stand up. My name is Anita Santos, and I want to thank you for having me here. I have a lot in common with all of my colleagues here, but I have to start by saying I too was born in the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base in Pampanga, and raised in Japan. And I mention that because my parents chose to stay in Japan during my early childhood, which was the mid-60s through the mid-70s, for the, I later learned, express purpose of shielding us from the racial animosity stateside, as we called it. I didn't obviously know that as a young child, but that framed my perspective of diversity and what I refer to as the poisonous environment, racial environment in the United States that has been the case for hundreds of years. I too am a child of immigrants from the Cape Verde Islands, so just having a completely different background where I was raised in an African American household who refused to pass on the culture and respond to the culture of racism. So we call it, my family refers to us as international lovers, and that was just how we were all raised. So coming stateside as a young child and a young adult has molded my perspective on diversity, and it's not foreign to me. It's nothing you have to learn. It's how everyone was until I was brought back stateside. So I've been heavily involved. My introduction to Contra Costa County was as a police dispatcher, then a police officer. And I have to say, I became a police officer after law school, so it was a little bit of a unique path. I came to Contra Costa County with the stereotype belief that I had that I would feel hostility and hatred, and actually Concord Police Department welcomed me with open arms. So I had a completely different experience than what I was expecting. Yes, I think I was the first African American woman. I was the only first woman to have a child as a police officer. So there were a lot of firsts, but my experience in Contra Costa County, although I will give you some examples of negatives and challenges, was wholly positive, even as a black female police dispatcher, then police officer. In fact, Concord PD, when Richmond PD told me no, my student law school debt was too high, Concord PD said, we'll take you right now. Sign here. Sign here. So I have a little bit of a different perspective and plenty of activities. Dinah Beckton was my mentor and brought me into the many activities regarding diversity and activities to help share. But my basic message is bring diversity, speak diversity, show diversity. What's that monkey? See no evil, say no evil. Be the example. So that's going to be my message throughout our questions and answers. Thank you for having me.
So my next question is to Robin Pearson, kind of dovetailing a little bit about what Judge Santos said about when she'd heard about the county before getting here. What types of statements have you heard about our county that might lead some attorneys and potential judges to be reluctant to work here?
I was working in San Francisco before I came to Contra Costa County, and I told a couple of my colleagues that I had a new job in Contra Costa, and I was excited, and my husband was thrilled that we were getting out of the cold city and coming to this warm place because we're from the East Coast, and that's why we moved to California in the first place. And they said to me, "What? Don't you know they lynched black people out there? There was a lynching at Concord BART station." I was like, "What? Lynching in California? This is craziness." I said, "I didn't hear about that." And they said, "Well, we'll show you, we'll give you proof. It's a really hostile place to come. They're not very welcoming to black people out there, so you better be careful." And I said, in typical New Jersey style, I got a job, I got bills to pay and loans to pay, I'm going. And if somebody has a problem with me, then we're going to have to work it out. But that gave me pause initially to hear that we weren't going to be treated well and they were lynching black people in Concord in the early 90s was insane as far as I was concerned. So that'd probably be the worst thing I heard.
So this question is to Judge Reyes. How do your experiences with diversity show the need for more diversity in Contra Costa County?
Thank you. I think I'll answer that question by sharing just a short vignette with you. When I was a practicing attorney, I had the occasion to visit a criminal courthouse and to sit in a master calendar call in the Richmond courthouse. And for those of you who don't have a criminal practice, the master calendar is when the judge calls the trials that are ready to be tried and also calls the cases that are ready for preliminary examination. And in that courtroom, there's usually a number of attorneys, and there's a number of people who are accused of crime also in the same room. I was sitting in the back, and the entire calendar was called, and I was still observing because I was very interested in observing in the courtroom. As I was sitting in the back there, a young deputy district attorney came up to me and asked me what case I was there for and who my public defender was. I admit that I wasn't wearing a tie that day. I was still a practicing attorney, and for those of you in civil practice, you know that we never wear ties unless we go into court. But the judge who had What's important about this particular matter is that this didn't happen early in my career. This happened 2 years ago, right after I was appointed to the bench. And Judge Hiramoto saw what was going on and spoke to the attorney and basically said to all the attorneys in the room, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet our newest judge, Judge Benjamin Reyes. And the look on that deputy district judge's face, I will never forget. That was really sort of my first experience in Contra Costa County. I'm not going to say.
Okay, so the next question I direct to Judge Santos, Phil, and Diana and Robin. Can you tell us about a time you felt stereotyped based on race and or gender and how it made you feel?
Oh, gosh. Well, let's see. About 20 times you walk into a courtroom and you're asked if you're the court reporter, or if they want to compliment you, tell you where all the defendants will be brought out, because that presumes you're a public defender. Oh, God. It is a positive. I guess I said when they're complimenting you, but that's the best that it gets. Oh, the girl, being referred to as girl, can you get that? Because they assume you're there as somebody's assistant or secretary. I'm mashing years of experience together. I started at the DA's office in Contra Costa County in 1997. And, oh gosh, what else? Only attorneys can sit in those seats. I don't know, half dozen times. Even though you're in a suit with a whole bunch of files. You ask for examples, right? Those are all examples.
And how it made you feel.
Oh, and of course, they all make you feel belittled. And actually, a young attorney told me when I first started out, you got to get a tough skin, let it roll off your back and respond with a positive. Otherwise, you'll be angry all the time. And so how I responded after the first or second time was usually, well, no, I know that. I belong here. I'm the DA, with a positive, just a smile, or if I'm being sarcastic, why do you ask? So thank you. Those are my examples, and they're just very, you can let them crush you, or you can educate either kindly or a little less than kindly. That's my response. And who else did you want? Phil.
So my experiences are quite different. Because I manage offices of about 40 people, and they're quite diverse, and I'm the boss, if I have to discipline someone or correct them or whatever, I found that emotional intelligence on my part is very important. So for example, if I were to correct someone in a way that's angry, I could exude the wrong message to that person that I'm not tolerant of them for other reasons. And so really I think diversity has its roots in kindness, respect, and to kind of lower your pride level and to start realizing, hey, just because I'm the boss, it doesn't mean I can treat people, abruptly. And once I get that message through, I feel like I'm more effective. Now, how have I felt stereotyped? It's because people have responded negatively toward me when I'm negative, and they assume that I may be racist. And that hurts because I don't feel like I am. But it's my fault for not having the right intelligence emotionally to communicate what I'm trying to get across in a more sensitive way. And so I just think we need to all work really hard at the way we approach people, the way we speak to them, and that we speak with them with kindness, consideration, and a little bit of humility so that we don't come across as being misinterpreted as something that we maybe don't intend to be. Thank you.
I think my experiences are similar to those of Judge Santos. Basically, walking into a courtroom in your suit, carrying your briefcase with your cases in it, and walking to where all of the other attorneys are sitting, and then being told, excuse me, you can't sit there because this is only for the lawyers. Another experience that I had that I won't even say it made me mad, I guess it sort of just made me chuckle at the time. I was serving as the presiding judge, and as was my custom, whenever we had a visiting judge come to the courthouse, especially if they hadn't been there before, I'd go over first thing in the morning to introduce myself, make sure they felt welcome, and that find out if they needed anything, and let the judge know that I would be back to take them to lunch and show them around. Well, I went in, again, I'm in a business suit. I say, good morning, how are you? Welcome to Contra Costa County. And I went out to shake my hand. She says, oh, are you going to be my clerk today?
No.
That's just a couple of my experiences.
You know, I'm sure I have the same litany of experiences that women have. I have to say, it's striking to me, I have not had the experiences that Judge Santos and Dinah Becton have had of coming into a courtroom and being told I can't sit there. So I have not faced that situation, but what I get, not anymore, but in the earlier days, what women would get from our clients was a distrust of us as their attorney. So we're the appointed public defender. There's already a distrust of that, you know, we're not really working for the client. We're just, you know, the best they could get, etc. And I can just remember so many experiences of the first time going in to meet a new client and sort of this look of disappointment, like you're not what they want, that you're not what they expected. That stopped after a while. I mean, after a time, you sort of develop a reputation, and sometimes, you know, it precedes you. And so, but you have to earn it. Whereas others who don't necessarily, you know, white men don't have to earn that, right? It comes with them where they go. So that's one thing. Then there's just, I got to just say, there's and this does still go on with some of the bench officers. I'm sure none of them that are present here. But there is an attitude, and you can feel it, and you can sense it when you're appearing in front of a judge who, because you're a woman, doesn't want to hear what you have to say, is going to be doing a little bit more interrupting, cutting you short, just not paying attention. And I'm sure all of the women attorneys in this room probably know what I'm talking about. And that still goes on, and that I'm sure is compounded for women of color, but it's real, and I can't tell you the number of experiences like that I've had.
So staying with Robin, the question I have for you and Diana Becton is, do you think color blindness is the goal in our legal community, and why or why not?
Stay with me. Okay. No, the answer is no. I think color blindness is a facade for we're not going to deal with racism. The term color blindness to me is really the opposite of what we need to be doing in the criminal justice system, which is that we need to acknowledge race. We need to look at what it means for people in the system, whether they're attorneys or defendants or anybody else in the system, that race does matter. Race has a very real effect on what's happening in the criminal justice system. And to say that we're colorblind is just saying that we live in a fantasy world. Nobody is colorblind unless you are in fact blind and deaf. You can't, there is no such thing as living in this society and being colorblind. It just can't happen. And so, no, I think that we don't aspire to be colorblind. I think we aspire to be a system that's fair and equitable to all. But when it comes to race, we have a lot of work to do to get there, and it is based on race. It's not based on the absence of color.
I also say no very strongly, because I think that because there's a lot, when you start pulling back the layers of what has happened in this country as with respect to race, it's really not a beautiful story. And when we talk about living in a world that's colorblind, it means that we really are, as Robert just mentioned, trying really not to have these kinds of conversations and trying to ignore, how we got to where we are and who we are. So I loved what Judge Santos said a few minutes ago when she said, bring diversity, see diversity. I think it's a beautiful thing. I want you to see me as a woman, as a Black woman, but also appreciate the fact that all of us, even in our differences, bring some wonderful and beautiful gifts to the table. And I think that's where we strive for, is to see each of us in our own glory and in our own beauty and in our own brightness and smartness, and appreciate what each of us brings to the table. Because all of our experiences are different. And we bring different voices and different experiences and different cultures and different foods and different everything to the table. And I think it's a wonderful thing to celebrate as opposed to trying to, hide away and shy away from.
My next question is for Robin Pearson. Do you think casual courtroom atmospheres can be disadvantageous to people of color?
The answer is
And why and why not?
yes, yes, yes. I think when you run into a situation where a courtroom is very relaxed and formalities are dropped, you run into, and I've run into this numerous times, a very buddy-buddy situation. I know you appear in front of me quite a bit, let's chat. I want to hear what you have to say, you out-of-towner, I don't care. And that's not always the best thing, especially if you have a difficult client or a difficult case and you really need to argue. I've been in situations where I think courts have been too formal, meaning I've been screamed at because I wore pants into court. And this is in the 2000s. I'm not talking 89, 90, I'm talking in the 2000s. I don't like to be screamed at by anybody, but to walk into a court because I'm not dressed according to the way the judge thinks I should, and I'm going to get kicked to the back of a long calendar did not sit well. But on the other hand, when you see a judge joking with another attorney, opposing counsel, really makes you question how your case is going to be decided. And I would like at least the appearance of fairness when I am arguing in front of a judge. I would like to be treated the same way as all the other attorneys in the courtroom are, and I just don't think that happens sometimes, not always, because most of the time the judges have good control over their courtroom. But I have been in situations where that's not the case, and it's made me feel very uncomfortable, and you have to struggle and fight to get your arguments out.
I'm just going to interject for a second. For those of you who do have questions, Tanya, who's over there on, I guess, your left-hand side of the classroom, is going to be walking around. So if you have questions, please make sure to pass them to her so she can start sorting through those. My next question is directed to Phil. Are there challenges to working with people from different backgrounds or backgrounds that are different from your own? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, as I mentioned before, if you're not careful, you can be perceived as being projecting something that you're not really trying to project. One of the things that we've tried to do is to be more self-aware of our own biases. And I think we all have them. There are these implicit biases, and if you deny that you have them, then you're not on the right track. But to try to become aware of them, take these exams, these Harvard bias tests, take a look at that and see how you do. It's amazing how much you think you can improve if you just think about that. We've tried to have more diversity in our ranks by joining diversity bar associations. And I think it's important to not stereotype people and say, oh, you're of this background, why don't you join this one? Well, maybe they don't want to join that one. So just letting go of the stereotypes would be a huge step forward.
So my next question is directed towards Judge Santos and Diana Becton. Have you been in situations where you were the only person of color in the room or at an event? And if so, how did that make you feel? What impact do you think that those types of experiences have had on you? Have you ever felt reluctant to attend an event because you felt you'd be the only person or one or few people from your racial background in attendance?
Thank you.
Okay, well, the answer to that is yes, 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 and yes. From the beginning to currently, and it is very common to be the only African American. Less common nowadays to be the only female, but very common to be the only African American. Initially, you feel very isolated, even if you don't know, there is one or two other African Americans, you notice. And so I always say to my kids, and I always have, is imagine if you walk into the room, you just scan the room. It's a party like this, you know, and you see nobody else that has any shade of brown. You know, on the initial gut reaction as a young lawyer, I wanted to leave. Now having all the years behind me, I want to stay, and I want to mingle, and I want to make my way around the room, and I want to talk to people I don't know, so that I can start reversing the stereotypes that Bill just mentioned. But you do notice. Professionally, I've convinced myself that I embrace it. I don't know how deep that is and how real that is. But on a social level, I have to say, I don't prefer. And what I'll say to my friends that I'm really close with is, don't you have one other brown friend? Just one? We don't even have to talk, but to scan the room and I can see. And I joke with an attorney that I'm good friends with, you may know him, Jerry Chang. He does the same thing with Asians. Like, no, don't. Okay, you go and I'll go and then we'll be each other's brown. Okay? So all I can say is it absolutely happens all the time. And just be aware of it. Think of it as if you come to a party at my house. And you just scan the party and there's 100 people there and you're the only white person or you're the only Mexican person, you would notice and then decide what are you going to do. You're going to turn around and leave, you're going to come in and make friends. Okay?
Okay, I'm going to follow you. Yes, yes, and yes. So many times when you walk in the room and you're just the only person, and this is just common over the years, and I think at first you can, especially when I was a lot younger, I could feel very isolated to walk in the room and scan it, as you said. We always do it every time, and not see anyone in the room who looks like you. And especially when you don't know anyone in the room, it really does feel very isolating. But I think over time, you have to make a decision. Either you're going to stay in the room and get to know people and start talking to people. And it hasn't really changed all that much, just depending on where I am. Like, for example, I think we were talking about this. We go to a department head meeting once a month right here in Contra Costa County. And right now, I'm the only African American sitting at the table in Contra Costa County for all of the department heads in this county. If I go to the conferences for district attorneys now, just think about it. 80-something% of the district attorneys in the United States are white and male, and only 1% are women of color. So the situation still exists, and I think over time we just know that that's what's going to happen. And you walk into the room and you just own the space and say, "I'm here."
Phil, I also want to get your input as well. I'm sorry. Phil, I also want to get your input on that question.
Question again?
The question was very long, but have you been in situations where you were the only person of your background? And if so, how did it make you feel? And what types of experiences or what impact do you think that had on you if you felt reluctant to be in such a situation?
I think I come from a different background. Like I mentioned, I grew up in Hawaii where I was with a lot of different people from all different races, and it didn't ever bother me. We all got along really well. And so I kind of enjoy environments where we're different, and I've tried to create that in my office. I've taken my time in hiring people to make sure we have a diverse office. I have to admit, I enjoy being around.
Next question is directed towards Judge Santos. Have you ever faced difficulties in getting a job or a position where within an organization based on your race? And if so, how did it make you feel?
So I'm going to kind of front her. I told her a story that led to this question. And that story is in 1997, I was a police officer in Concord, and an opening came at the district attorney's office, and I had my gave birth to my first son, and so being a cop wasn't quite as fun anymore, working graveyard, schlepping around that belt. And so I thought I'd apply. Well, I learned later, I didn't hear for the longest time, and then I heard very quickly and got picked up very quickly. And what I learned later was confirmed, so I can tell it as a true story, is that the person that hired me, who was, I think, third in line in the office at the time, waited until the number 2 in line was on vacation and out of state, because he would have never have hired me, sent me out to Richmond to start my career as a deputy district attorney in Richmond, and turns out kept me in Richmond to keep number 2 in line from ever meeting me. So I met number 2 in line at his retirement, and when I met him and shook his hand, he said, "You're Anita Santos?" And of course everyone thinks I'm Mexican or Filipino because of my name. And I said, "Well, yes." And you're and I know who you are. And I learned that the only way I could get that job, even though I had been a police officer and Hastings grad and finally passed the bar, but that's a different story, was when he was on vacation and he didn't know. So that was my experience, and another second introduction to Contra Costa County.
So my next question is directed towards Robin Lepetsky. Can you tell us about a time you stood up for diverse populations in the Contra Costa County legal community and how that was received by the Contra Costa County legal community?
Sure. So Kiana did her homework in coming up with these questions, so she's got the background. Back in December of 2014, which was when the Black Lives Matter movement was in full swing, and there were a lot of political actions, a lot of discussion around the killings of young black men by police officers. The public defenders in the Bay Area and also in some offices in Southern California had decided on a day that we would all do some kind of symbolic action to show our support of the Black Lives Movement as public defenders. And so on December 18th of 2014, our office, actually organized by my attorneys, I didn't even know about it until a couple days before it happened, but they had organized an event that took place at noon on the courthouse steps. It was a silent event where we stood with our hands up, which was at that time a symbol of that hands up, don't shoot that was going on. And I took my attorneys asked if I would say a few words, and I said sure. And I spoke for, I think, a total of about 90 seconds. And I said things like, we have to start looking at what's going on with the racial disparities in our criminal justice system in Contra Costa County, because it's real and it's happening here. And we as public defenders know it because we go in these courtrooms every single day and we see who our clients are, and we see the disparities in sentences and charging decisions, and I think I also mentioned the shackling of juvenile clients, and that they were transported to court and walked across the street in a public arena with shackles on, and most of them being black and brown children of color, and the optics of that. And so I spoke, the press was there, it was recorded. By the end of the day, the then District Attorney Mark Peterson was accusing me of inflaming racial tensions in the county, that by bringing up race, I was accusing every law enforcement officer of being racist, that I had accused every judge on the bench of being a racist. I had accused our sheriff, none of which I had said. But this was his interpretation. He was deeply upset by this and wrote to the Board of Supervisors implying that I shouldn't have my job anymore. So there was huge and immediate pushback. But what I do want to say is that what that did, the positive that came out of that was that the community saw this public debate that went on, because it went on in the press for several days, and back and forth, and op-ed pieces and whatnot. The community got together and formed a racial justice coalition and asked the Board of Supervisors to take some kind of action and actually to gather statistics, because one of the things that I was accused of was making this all up, that there was really absolutely no evidence that any of this was the case. If there were more black and brown people in jail, it's because they were committing more crimes, and that was all there was to it. So the Board of Supervisors, to their credit, stepped up, did gather the statistics, did present it in a public way, and of course the statistics did show that in fact there are racial disparities at every juncture in the criminal justice system. And now we have a county-supported racial justice task force and racial justice oversight body made up of members of all of the criminal justice agencies and members of the community. And we have made huge progress in looking at what is actually going on in our criminal justice system with regard to racial disparities and how can we address them. And so had I not made that little 90-second speech, I don't know that we would be, and I'm not taking credit for this, that's not my intention. What I'm saying is that when we raise these issues publicly and it strikes a chord and people become energized, then we can do the work and then things start to happen. So it ended up on a positive note. And we have Dinah Becton now as our district attorney, and things are in a very different place than they were a few years back.
My next question is directed towards Judge Reyes. Judge Reyes, Robin Pearson, and Phil Anderson. Do you feel members of diverse populations have the same opportunities to be mentored in the private sector that members of majority populations have? And have you ever gone out of your way to mentor someone from a different background, that is of a different background from your own? And if so, what was your experience with that? And if not, why? What has stopped you from doing that?
Objection compound. I'll answer this question this way. If you ask me the question about whether or not I believe that there were opportunities to be mentored, it would be no. As a young associate in a majority law firm and the only associate of color, I've been made aware that many of my colleagues who are also young associates were invited to private parties with partners of that firm, and I'd been excluded from those events and was never taken aside and never mentored by any of the senior partners until the young woman partner to whom I was assigned took me under her wing. So I didn't see that first. But in my most recent law firm, where I joined as an associate and ultimately became a partner, we had a formalized mentorship program. And one of the senior partners, who happened to be a white Jewish man, took me under his wing, taught me how to become city attorney, taught me the public agency counsel experience, and ultimately sponsored me for equity partnership at the firm. So if you were to ask me the question now in the private sector, I would say yes. And I have gone out of my way to mentor many young attorneys and many law students who have come up to me and asked me for help. Not because I think I have any special skills that I have to share with them, but because I want them to learn from the mistakes that I've made as a young associate and as a young attorney and how they can improve upon it. And that's basically my experience. I found the experience of mentoring people to be a very good one, because not only do I believe that the young attorneys learn from the wisdom or lack thereof of my experience, but I learned a great amount from my mentees about the approach to practicing law, about the approach to being inclusive, and about just a different perspective on society. So I find that to be a very rewarding experience.
experience 30 years ago was no, 20 years ago, no, and even 10 years ago, no. Mentoring had been a colossal failure in the firms that I worked for, and I don't know if it was just my experience as a woman of color or for all the other attorneys in the firm, starting as a young associate, working my way up the ranks. When firms started to institute mentoring programs, I subsequently found out that there was a history of assigning the African American attorneys to the same partner who really didn't like African Americans. So it was not something that would help you succeed in the firm. You had no partnership track. You were not going anywhere. In fact, you were excluded even more than you had been before. Which is one of the reasons that I started my own firm with my partner, who's a younger white male, but is very open to working with somebody who is different. I get calls all the time, emails, I get hit up on LinkedIn by people from all races and ethnicities saying, I read your profile, or I saw you here, can you help me with this? And 9 times out of 10, I always do it. Mentors come in all shapes and sizes, and all colors. You cannot close yourself off to anybody or refuse to help somebody because they don't look like you. People come into your life for a season, they help you for a particular reason, and then they may go out of your life for a reason. And I have had so many mentors that have been white males, white females, other people of color throughout my entire career, that I feel that's really what got me to where I am now. It wasn't anything that my firms did over the years, but I looked and I learned, and I decided that's not what I want to do, and that's not how I want to run my own firm. Because we're just like little kids. Sprinkle us with water and we can learn so much, and that has been my experience with mentoring. It's invaluable, but look outside of your law firm. If you work for a law firm, look with other groups that you may join. I looked once to Black Women Lawyers. I went to a couple of events, met Kamala Harris and a whole bunch of different people who really lifted me up when I was down. And because of that, I ended up becoming, unfortunately, the president the next year of that organization because I didn't have anybody else. But it was a wonderful experience.
A few months ago, I had an opening for a paralegal, and a woman who was an attorney licensed in India applied. It wasn't the best fit, but I decided to interview her. It really still wasn't the best fit when I talked to her because we needed somebody long-term, and she couldn't because her immigration status was a certain way. But we decided to hire her as a temp, and for several months she stayed with us and did a fantastic job. And later we were able to get her a job in San Jose with an immigration firm, and it maintained her immigration status. She's been so thankful for that opportunity to learn how to kind of get her first job in America. And I just recently met her parents on a social event, and they were so pleasant and kind. They're both professional doctors. She comes from a very professional family, but it was just such a treat to be able to help somebody in their immigration status.
My final question for this segment, for my questions, is to Judges Santos and Reyes. How do you ensure you are not making decisions or interacting with litigants in a more or less favorable manner due to implicit bias?
Well, first of all, I acknowledge that I have them, which is important. I can't profess that I am aware of all of mine, but I certainly am aware that I have a bias against privilege and the attitude of privilege. And so for anyone that comes into my courtroom with that. Secondly, given my background, I acknowledge that I may have a little bit of a bias criminally, and I acknowledge that. And so one of the things I do is, if depending on which side is making the argument or making the request, and I'm contemplating it, so low I may be, because I contemplate everything, I often will switch. If this side of the table were making that request or that argument, what would would my thoughts be? And that helps me understand some of the biases I have, and I do that frequently to make sure that your decisions are not based on who's asking and who's requesting and who's perhaps the better arguer, but soundly based in the law and removing the bias that I know that I have. I also have a bias against super aggressive attorneys. You know, we're all advocates, and I abhor rudeness. So sometimes you have to say, if that were proposed to me without that tone, you know, because then you're reacting out of anger. So that's how I try to address my biases, and I bring them forth in my own mind. And often, you know, I will even close my eyes and think about it. That's how I address mine, and still work in progress. That's what I tell all the litigants. We on the bench, or I was you yesterday. We're individuals, so works in progress.
Thank you, Judge Santos. I admit that I have a bias too, and that the bias is against those who aren't well prepared to argue their cases or to represent their clients in a manner that befits an attorney who has a duty to zealously advocate on behalf of their client. My default in treating litigants and people who come before the court is that I always treat people with dignity and respect, no matter what the charges are against them. It can be a hardened recidivist person who's facing a murder charge, but I will still call that person sir or ma'am when he or she comes into my courtroom, even if they're in custody. I will always acknowledge a person who's accused of a crime, and that's sometimes surprising because what I do whenever I start court is I have the attorneys make their appearance, and I say, good morning, counsel, and good morning, Mr. or Ms. Defendant. And I would always get a surprised look from the defendant saying, gee, you're talking to me? And so my default is to treat everyone with dignity and respect, no matter who they are, no matter what side of the table they are on. And I would expect the same thing in return from the litigants who come before me. I think that's really all I have to say about that.
So we're going to stick with you. We're moving to audience questions. This one is directed to Judge Reyes. Are there any Asian American jurists that you have looked up to as an example or as a mentor?
As an example, yes. Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakaguye is one of my personal heroes. I've admired and watched her career from when she was a district attorney to when she was appointed to the municipal court, the Superior Court, and when, as a member of FNAIM, we sponsored her elevation to the Court of Appeal. And it wasn't surprising at all for me when Appellate Court Justice Tani Cantil-Sakaguye was elevated to the Supreme Court. So she is certainly a personal hero of mine. I do have a lot of respect for whom I consider to be my predecessor, the first Filipino-American judge who was appointed back in 1983 during Governor Brown 1. And that's Judge Ronald Kitachai. And Judge Kitachai, who was assigned to the San Francisco Superior Court, just recently retired. And he told me one time that he would not retire until the next Filipino-American judge was appointed to the bench. And surely after he was appointed, after I was appointed to the bench, he announced his retirement. So, I do have that warm space in my heart for Judge Kitachai.
The next question for the panelists is, have you taken the Harvard implicit bias test? Which ones, and what did you learn from the results? Who wants to answer that?
I'll answer that today because I took it this afternoon in preparation for this panel. I had taken many aspects of the test before, and what was surprising to me is that although I have a number of friends who are gay, bisexual, LGBT, it showed that I had a slight bias against gay, bisexual, lesbian people. And I don't know if it was because of the input of the data that I had put in. I had put in that I was Asian male, and I grew up in a conservative Catholic household and that I had very conservative backgrounds. But that's nowhere near my thought process, and certainly nowhere near the love that I feel for my family members who just are LGBTQ, and that to me was very surprising. I did take the racial bias test, and it did suggest that I didn't have any biases in that area. So I thought that in one case it confirmed that my biases were, or lack thereof, were accurate, and in another case I was really surprised by the result. Anybody else?
I did take it as well, and I came out just where I thought I was. I'm great with everybody.
So this question is also to the panelists. Does increasing diversity have to come from the top down? In other words, what can a young attorney do when trotted out to be shown to a client and then returned to doing discovery in their office?
Well, I guess that question's for me. It's such a different time now than when that happened. What I think that you need to do if you find this happening is you have to take a stand for yourself. If you don't protect yourself and promote yourself, believe me, nobody's going to go out on a limb and do that for you. I did that at a time when that was not a popular thing to do, and it cost me my job. I don't think that's going to happen today. What I would suggest you do is you go out to the other groups, talk to other attorneys, get feedback from them about the proper way to approach it. If you have a safe harbor in your firm, a partner you can talk to, a senior associate, or even just another associate like you, talk to them. The worst thing you can do is flare up, be angry, spout off, and get yourself in trouble. And that's your first reaction when something like that happens. But what often happens also is, even though I spoke up for myself, I was approached by the client later on, and they said, we knew what was going on there. We are not working with that firm. And you follow up with us when you land somewhere, and we will start to develop a relationship. It doesn't happen overnight, but that's what happened with me. And that was a very positive result from a very negative situation. One more example is my roommate when I first moved to Southern California, and I worked at a firm, and he was a gay man. And he was in the closet because our firm was very conservative at the time, and he did not want to come out. And he asked me about it, and I said, you have to live your truth, and you have to be able to be yourself. If you can't do that, perhaps this isn't the firm for you. I can't hide who I am. People look at me, and they see a very tall, probably loud African-American woman, and I mean loud with my laugh. But, you know, they can't pretend that I'm not who I am. So I said, if you feel this strongly about this, you need to let them know and do your job. And of course they fired him. But he was so relieved and so happy that he could be himself. He found another job and continues to practice very happily down in Southern California. So you have to gauge the situation, talk to other people, and do what's best for you. You don't want to stay someplace where you're going to be miserable for the rest of your legal career. Life is way too short for that.
Okay, what advice would you give to white practitioners representing minority clients?
Listen, know your audience, know your clients, if it's individuals or businesses. Their business needs to become your business. Be yourself. One thing I hate to see is all of a sudden the white man who's pretty straightforward is meeting with a bunch of African American people, is using slang that I've never even heard of. It doesn't make sense, it's not who you are, and the clients don't want to see that. They've come to you because they want good legal representation. Show that to them, okay? You don't have to go outside of who you are, you don't have to dress differently, you don't have to know the latest songs on the radio or anything like that, because in the reverse, it's the same thing. When I represent white clients, I don't suddenly come into the conference room and go, well, you know, oh my gosh, I don't talk like that. I'm myself. I dress how I dress, and they want to know an answer to their legal question. So that's all people are looking for, good results, and not paying their bills.
We're going to move on to the solutions portion of the program. But the first audience question, or the next audience question is kind of geared towards that. What kind of diversity training is and should be offered to judges?
Lots. Actually, judges get quite a bit of diversity training from the very beginning. So judges have to go to school, by the way, and right away we have to go to what's the first thing we go to? It's called, I forget. Yeah, new judges orientation, and you get a good dose about diversity there. And within your first year, you have to go to judicial college, which is a very intense 2-week process. And one of the things we learned over the years, because COAF, the Council of Access and Fairness, used to track the educational programs for judges to make sure that diversity and bias issues were included in the programming. And what we found over the years, though, is that the council has done a very good job, actually, of incorporating bias issues and incorporating diversity into most of the curriculum. So I would say, from my perspective, I think judges get a very, very good dose of training, and I think it's incorporated into now almost every aspect of their education.
What are some ways that we can be more aware of bias in the courtroom/legal community and address that head on? This is for all panelists.
So I think one of the things that is important is to understand that the disparities are there, and that the racial problems, the issues do exist. And I think just naming it and recognizing it and acknowledging goes a long ways towards starting to address the problem. So again, sort of getting back to this issue of shouldn't we just all be colorblind? I think what we need is to do the opposite of that, and to take what we know from, and again, I'm talking from the perspective of the criminal justice system, but to take what we now know about the situation and what is going on at least in our county. Obviously it's going on, it's not just Contra Costa County, it's California, it's the nation. But just being aware of it. And as public defenders, we're always trying to figure out how to work race into our defense of our clients. How do you bring it up in voir dire? How do you talk about it in a trial? How do you talk about it in bail motions? Without risking the kind of backlash of, you're playing for sympathy, or you're playing the race card, or you're, accusing me of being racist. And so it's a fine line about, especially when you have a client to represent, like how are you going to raise these issues in a way that's going to be effective and work towards a positive outcome rather than just anger the judge or the district attorney or whomever it is you're dealing with. But I think continuing to talk about the issue, continuing to raise it, recognize it, and address it is very important.
So this is for Robin Lepetsky and Diana Becton. What can you do to ensure that those who work under you are aware of and sensitive to the needs and experiences of diverse populations, especially trans?
Well, from the standpoint of an organization, I think one of the most important things is the training. and how important it is to make sure that we bring in those who are very experienced and trained, and also trusted, I would say, by the audience that they're speaking to not only bring the heightened awareness, but also give some very, very practical solutions and tips that people can incorporate into their work every single day. So we had a similar training in our office with the district attorney, and I think you all used a similar trainer, excellent professor from Georgetown University, and I think it was probably the first time that we had that heightened awareness about diversity and bias issues in our office. And then I think the other thing that's also important is the conversations that we have to have around immigration issues. And it was very important to me to bring some excellent trainers into our office to train on those issues and to have that conversation as well.
So for our department, we also have had extensive training, multiple trainings in the area of implicit bias, but also in fact just today we had a training, or maybe it was yesterday, on client relations, which was really focused on how does the attorney build that kind of trust and rapport and understanding and empathy for the client that the attorney is representing. So as public defenders, we tend to feel like we've already arrived, we're evolved, we're there, we're doing good work. And that maybe we're not the ones that need to work on this issue, but we do. And so recognizing that we have the same biases as everybody else, and it's even more important, I think, that we as public defenders work on our issues, because we are the ones there standing next to the people that we are representing, and if we can't bridge that gap and reach that kind of understanding and show that person that we actually are doing our best to fight for that individual. If we can't do that, then nobody in the system is going to be able to do that. So we work very hard at that. We also work very hard, I work very hard at bringing in a diverse and inclusive workforce. And I don't know if maybe that's a different question we're going to go to, but training is really important.
So this question is directed toward Robin Pearson and Phil Anderson. Knowing that several firms, law firms, may have trouble attracting and retaining members of diverse population, what can these firms do to make their working environments more inclusive and hospitable to members of diverse populations?
So when I served as the chair of the State Farm Diversity Committee for a year, we have 400 lawyers throughout the United States. And one of my initiatives was to try to get us involved with diversity bar associations, to just kind of mingle more, to get more ideas, to broaden our scope of who's out there. Sometimes we're too quick to make hiring decisions with just the people that we see the resumes on that come through first. That we're a little more deliberate. We can take the time to get a good diverse workforce, but that's not the end of it. It's inclusion too, and when you have a diverse workforce, sometimes people don't get along because they are different from each other. And so you have to take the next step of having different types of events, or making sure that you don't impose stereotypes, like just because somebody's in a certain background that they're going to want to work with somebody else in the same background. I've made that mistake too many times, and I think I'm learning from it. But just being aware to try to treat people with respect and dignity, and don't make presumptions about the interests without really understanding.
Yes, I echo what Phil has said. And I hear this problem all the time from large, mid-sized, and even small law firms throughout California. Inclusion is critical. You cannot bring people in and then abandon them in a firm. You have to involve them. When they're associates or senior counsel or even non-equity partners, include them in the decision-making. Don't leave them out. You have to get rid of the clique environment that still exists in firms. The last time I was at a large firm or mid-sized firm, came in as a lateral, really went out of my way to talk to people, They were very friendly, but when it came to going to lunch or having meetings or meeting clients, I was always excluded. And then they wondered why they couldn't attract more people of color. When you're interviewing people, you have to recognize that if you don't have anybody that's diverse on your website, that's an attorney or a partner, that's an immediate turnoff to people to come to your firm. It's not Contra Costa County necessarily anymore. It's what you're doing there. You have to go. You have to become involved. Join Charles Houston. It doesn't matter if you're white, if you're Asian, if you're black, if you're Hispanic, go. Meet more people. There are a lot of people out there looking for jobs that would be happy to work in a good firm. This is what Walmart did. Now, I'm not saying I hold them up to be the example of the best place to work in the world, but when they were first in Arkansas, what did they do? They started going to all the minority group meetings and meeting people and saying, we want to learn, we want to know, we want to have more people come into our legal department that are diverse. And at first, people looked at them sideways, but they never gave up. They kept going. And that's what you have to do. You have to include them, you have to find ways to mentor them, you have to introduce them to clients, you have to give them the same opportunities that you give all the other non-diverse attorneys in your law firm. That's a start. It's a long, long road, but you have to just start there. Because believe me, that's the first thing that people look at.
Final question, what can we do to encourage or promote members of diverse populations in leadership positions in your respective organizations? This is for all families.
I'd like to start on that one. You ask them. You ask them to, like Dinah did me, come in and be vice president. You know, you invite them. Personal invitations are sold, but as you know, not very good. They mean something. When you want someone to come to an event, send them a personal email. So same thing in leadership. I lead by example. Don't ask them and then say, I'm out. Ask them and say, I'll work with you. I'll work alongside you. You become president and I'll be parliamentarian. I didn't know that one. But that's my number one. Number two is be willing to take on these mentorship roles and these positions, even if you don't necessarily want to, because you're trying to mentor others to come into the fold to act in these positions. So that's how you do it.
When I was at my law firm and practicing law, the mentality that I had maintained was that I'm always training my successor. I'm always training somebody to take over my practice, and it was part of the culture of the law firm that we had created. So that by necessity means that you have to mentor somebody, and that you have to make sure that the way is paid for them to be able to succeed. So I would suggest that to anyone who's in private practice, always look out for your practice and groom the next generation, or else you'll be what many law firms out there have been in the past, basically a one-generation law firm. You don't want that. You want to be able to continue to move on and have the practice thrive and have it continue without you.
So I would echo what Robin said, which is that it's an ongoing effort. You don't just hire the people and then say your job is done. So it's hard work and it's continuous work, and you have to be very intentional and focused about it so that you are providing opportunities to the new attorneys who may not see themselves in leadership roles or may not view themselves as management potential. And you have to develop the confidence, you have to help give them those assignments that are going to give them the skill set and let them have the same opportunity that other people have, that other people may be given just by virtue of who they are. So it starts for my department. I mean, we start trying to recruit people of color from, law school, and we work very hard to go out and find summer law clerks. And we go to the public interest fairs, and we send people to those events that are going to be able to relate to the people that we are trying to recruit. So at every step of the way, we are trying very hard to do the outreach and the recruitment and then the work to retain people. And so it's an ongoing process, and you just have to just keep working at it. And I have to tell one funny story, is that the county, because we're a county agency, every year we have to turn in our statistics about gender and race and ethnicity in our workforce. And where you're lacking, they tell you, and you have to come up with a plan. So for the last several years, my target group that I have to work on is white men. So I actually had to come up with some kind of strategy for recruiting and retaining white men in the public defender's office. You'd appreciate that.
Can I just mention that we have a program here that we have been trying to promote since the early 2000s, like 2003 or 4, Lisa, is that right? Bay Area Minority Summer Clerkship Program. This is a wonderful opportunity for law firms to get in law students that have finished their first year and are looking for an opportunity to join a firm and learn how it works. These are top-rate students that have really excelled during their first year. When we tried to introduce it in 2003, we received extreme resistance from the law firms in the county because they did not want to hire first years. But these children are so exceptional, and we place them in every county except Contra Costa for years and years. Lisa Roberts and myself kept going to this program. And finally, we got firms in the last couple of years to participate. I have been tracking students since 2003. They keep sending me emails. Robin, this is where I am now. Well, now they're up for partnership in some of the firms, and I mean big firms. Their careers are like bypassing mine, but they're amazing. And that's a real easy way to get involved and meet more minority students and get them into your law firms as well. And lead by example. If you're out there at events going, hey, look at me, I'm here, and I've come from Contra Costa, even though this is down in Santa Clara, but you know, you can do it, you can get out there. Well, people will take notice of that and keep inviting them. I have a receptionist now who's going to law school at Golden Gate in the fall. I drag her to every single women's section event and bar event that I possibly can. And she's loving it, and it's sinking in. And she's like, okay, I see what can happen. I see possibilities out there for me as a young woman lawyer. I mean, it can be as simple as that.
I think the recruitment, starting at the very, very beginning, is a very, very important piece of building the leadership in an organization. And it's one of the things that we have to be very, very intentional about. So we're recruiting all over the state of California. We have created in our district attorney's office a 1L Academy. I think it's the only standalone 1L Academy in the state, so that we can begin to develop these relationships with the very young lawyers. Also, we've held at some of our law schools, not just recruitment events, but events to help folks to fill out their resumes and to know how to interview and know what to expect at a district attorney's office. There's also been a lot of effort, some of it from various organizations, some of the nonprofits, to change the face of what a prosecutor looks like, and making sure that we're sending a message that there's work to be done. There really is work where you can be really a force and a good, positive force within your communities. And then once people are in the office, there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into the retention piece, because part of it is feeling welcome in the organization, part of it is making sure that people get the training that they need, and then another part of it is just making sure that people feel like that they're getting good support from you. And so you begin to spot people and to see how they treat others, see what their work ethic is, and you begin to support them and put them in the positions where they can grow into leadership. So it is an ongoing effort.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for tonight, but I want to thank our distinguished panel of guests for their time and other members of the Racial Reconciliation Subcommittee, Teresa Hurley, Tanya Brown, Donald Lancaster, Audrey G., Mika Domingo, and Judge Reyes. Without you, this event would not have been possible. Finally, I want to thank you all for attending. if you want some more ideas of ways your organization can foster diversity in Contra Costa County, please see our diversity checklist, which can be found on the CCCBA website. Submissions are due by December 3rd, 2019, and awards are given out at the CCCBA installation luncheon in January of 2020. Please stick around and enjoy our reception courtesy of Brown G. Winger, Ann Winger, Tanya R. Brown Esquire, law offices of Vanessa Candelaria, Cooper White and Cooper, MS Domingo, Law Office, Lancaster Law Group, Law Office of Marjorie A. Wallace, and Washington and Associates. Thank you. Good night.
My name is Teresa Hurley. I'm the Executive Director of the Contra Costa Youth Farm. I would like to give a huge thank you to Kiana for putting this together. And my wish is this is just the first of many conversations that we have in many different ways about what we can do in our county to make it more diverse.